everybody, me again. I managed to get out fishing at the weekend, which was spectacular. Caught 2 beautiful rainbow trout. The biggest one was just over 4 pounds. Made a delightful supper. But the story of the day was the monstrous, excuse me, the monstrous brown trout that I hooked, fought for 2 minutes and lost. Fortunately, my knot didn't fail. The hook didn't straighten. It just, the trout threw the hook. There was nothing I could do with this thing. It must have been, I don't know, at least 8 pounds, if not pushing 9. It was big and it took me on a merry dance. It was a bit like I'd hooked a donkey that was then going nuts. So I thought I'd show you the fly that hooked the fish of my dreams and ultimately broke my heart. It's a relatively simple tie, variation on a pheasant tail. In the vise, I have a Togens wet fly hook in size 12, and on top of that, I have a tungsten jig-off bead in 2.8 millimeters. And to save a bit of time on the video so you don't watch me doing millions of thread wraps, I've just stuck a thread dam behind the bead to make it set up in the position that I want it to. Thread, dark thread, I would recommend. I'm using a brown Danville 6/0, but again, you can use what you want. And we're going to take that down to the bend of the hook. And whilst we're doing that, just to save a bit of bulk, we are going to tie in our rib, which is, in this instance, copper wire. And the bead is really the trigger point for the trout. So I've gone relatively traditional and dull on the rib. But it's your call, it's your fly, how you want to fish it. This is the one that hooked me anyway, that brown trout. Tail, cock pheasant tail. On a nice pinch, sort of 9 or 10, I would have said at least, fibres. Pull them 90 degrees from the stem of the feather and tear them away. And tail-wise, I want a tail about the length of the hook shank. So transfer that measurement forwards once you've measured it up, and just let the thread wraps bring the pheasant tail onto the top of the shank. Now you can measure up. That's a bit long for me, so I'm just going to keep the thread under tension and give it a pull. And then for me, I like to take the pheasant tail all the way up to the bead. It creates uniformity. I know you can use those fibres as the body material as well if you want to, and this might be a little bit wasteful, but I like to just create a bit of uniformity going up the fly with that, and I'll use another bunch for the body. So when you've done that, bring your thread back down again. Body, more pheasant tail, 5 or 6 fibres this time, you don't need so many, but again, bring them 90 degrees from the stem and just tear them away. And then what I recommend you do is just snip those really fine tips off. If it's going to snap, that's a weak point, so you get a nice uniform tie-in point. You can then just use thread tension to hold it in place and draw them all back to minimise bulk at the tie-in point. There we go. I'm just going to build a little bit of a taper, not much because the feather fibres will naturally taper for us anyway. Just talk amongst yourselves. There we go. And then I'm going to throw in a quick whip finish. Just save my work, save any embarrassment, save my blushes, all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to take this pheasant tail and we're going to wrap it in the same direction that we wrap our thread, because we're going to counter wrap with the wire. And bring your pheasant tail up, nice touching turns, just take your time. As that feather gets a little bit shorter, just slow down because otherwise it'll slip out your fingers and the entire fly will come unravelled. This always happens. And when you've reached right up behind the bead, tie it in, a couple of wraps behind, a couple of wraps in front, a couple of wraps behind, snip off your excess without snipping off the thread, which we've all done as well. Here we go. If you've got any bits sticking out, don't worry about it, because we're going to dub the thorax as well. And now for the ribbing. And the reason we take the pheasant tail the same way as the thread is because we're going to counter wrap with the rib. And the beauty is, because the rib is tied on my side of the hook, the first wrap is underneath and away from the tail. If I was to wrap towards you guys, the tension in the wire would try and push the tail towards you and misshape the fly slightly. So that first wrap is away from the tail. And then we're just going to do nice open turns, nice and even. Tell me if it's not even with you. Up to behind the bead. Excuse my hands. Couple of turns behind, couple of turns in front. This is quite thick wire, so I want more turns behind here. And then keeping that under tension. It's come undone a bit, isn't it? We're going to try and helicopter that off. There we go. It's a bit scruffy, but it'll do. It'll catch fish. That's what we want. And finally, a thorax. Vicuna dubbing in UV black. It's got a tiny hint of flash to it, and it's also really soft and easy to dub. And you don't need much. We want to create a nice thin dubbing noodle. You can see how thin that is. And then do the same again, a little bit more. You can always take it off. You can't really... So you can always put more on when you're doing dubbing noodles. It's harder to take it off. And then start behind the bead and just take it down. But again, this is your fly. Make the thorax as thin or as thick or however you want it to look. I want a tiny bit more there. There we go. I just want a bit more behind the bead. There, that is what I'm looking for. And then whip finish. You can use varnish or resin if you want to. I tend not to. A couple of whip finishes. I've never had a fly come undone. 1. 2. Pull your thread tight to seat the knot. Snip your thread off close. That's it. Simple, easy, single fly this was. You're not allowed to fish teams where I was, so it was a single fly. I cast it out into a bit of water that had some movement to it and let the water move the fly about, and the fish absolutely hammered it. And it wasn't just the brown trout, the 4-pound trout was also hooked on this bad boy, so it definitely works. Give it a go, get some jig off beads from Togens. Let me know how you get on. Find me on social media, find me through Togens if you want to, and keep me posted, and I'll see you next time. Take care.